Okay, it's another day, and yes, it's another GoPro Mission 1 series video. Yes, I know I said I'd do some other stuff, but this one's fairly important, and it regards a feature on the Mission 1 series cameras that hasn't really got any attention at all that I can see, but it is pretty important and will kind of illustrate in a way, or give us a hint as to the kind of image performance we can expect from these cameras. Now, the feature that I'm talking about here is something that's called dual gain readout, or dual gain output. Now, some of you who are into cameras, you might have heard of something called dual base ISO, and the two things are related, but they work slightly differently in terms of their implementation. One thing that is also interesting is that GoPro is hinting that the sensor in the new camera is new. Traditionally, GoPro has used Sony sensors, so there has been some discussion I've seen in forums and message boards where some people have speculated as to whether GoPro is using the same sensor that's found in the DJI Pocket 4, but I don't think that is the case. GoPro does have a track record of using new Sony sensors before they come onto the general market, so I'm going to stick my neck out here and say that I think that GoPro is possibly using a brand new Sony sensor and it's keeping its relationship with that company. The other reason I say this is because Sony sensors are known for their dual gain output capability. It's not in every sensor and it's not in every camera that Sony produces, but Sony is one of the pioneers of this particular technology. So that's another reason why I do think that GoPro is using a Sony sensor inside the Mission 1 cameras. Now, for the most part, dual gain output is generally only seen in very high-end cameras such as the Arri Alexa and some of Canon's cinema cameras. It can also be found in some of the flagship mirrorless models as well from Sony and Panasonic. I think the GH6 has it if you engage the expanded dynamic range function on that camera. So it is generally found in flagship cameras or high-end cinema cameras and is rarely found on cameras below $1,000. But what exactly is dual gain output and dual base ISO, and how do these things work? Well, I don't want to go too complicated on this. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I possibly can. So a traditional camera, when the photons are captured by the sensor, what happens is the signal goes through an analog amplifier and then it goes through an analog to digital conversion process. Now, when you increase the ISO setting or the gain setting on your camera, it takes place after the analog to digital conversion, which means that you're boosting the already converted signal and you're just boosting any noise that is in that image, which is why it becomes noisier and less appealing to look at. Now, a camera that has dual base ISO uses that same system. The difference is that when you get to a certain ISO level, a different circuit kicks in called the high gain circuit. Now, what this does is it provides a higher boost to the signal via the analog amplifier. That's before the analog to digital conversion takes place. You're getting quieter shadows because that boost to the signal has taken place before the analog to digital conversion, which is obviously very good for low light situations. Now, you might say, well, why not just do that anyway? Well, obviously, if you put a high gain circuit into your camera by default, then you're going to blow out all your highlights really easily. You're just going to need a whole load more ND on your lens. So by having a dual base ISO system, such as that found on, for example, some of the Blackmagic design pocket cinema cameras, it means you can get the best of both worlds with dynamic range and the signal to noise ratio at normal light levels. And then when you need that low light performance, the camera can kick in to that high gain circuit and you've got the advantages of having quieter shadows in those low light situations. Now, dual gain output does something slightly differently. Both the circuits do the same thing. The difference is that the camera captures the information from both the low gain circuit and the high gain circuit in one go. That's in one frame. and then it combines them computationally. One thing to say is that this shouldn't be mistaken for traditional HDR methods. The traditional way of doing HDR can create ghosting, and it also limits the frame rates in which you can use that functionality. Dual gain output, as I say, captures everything in one frame, but it is still computationally complex to implement in the camera, which is why you only generally see it on some of the more higher end cameras. But what are the advantages of this system? Well, the first thing is you get a much wider dynamic range. So we can see that the Mission 1 series has a claimed 14 stop dynamic range, which for a small camera like that is extremely good. But the offset of it is that you also get quieter shadows as well. And as you go up through your ISO settings on the camera, you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the wider dynamic range, but you're also getting the low light performance because your shadow detail is much quieter than it would be just using a traditional capture off the sensor. But unlike the dual base ISO system, you have the low light performance because of the quieter shadows, but you also have that extended dynamic range as well because you're capturing both gain circuits simultaneously. Now, another advantage to this, and it's directly related to the low light performance, is that this works very well for slow motion modes. Now, with the Mission 1 series using very high frame rates, 240 frames per second in 4K and up to 960 in 1080p, having this kind of circuitry on the system will mean that these frame rates can be used in a much wider variety of circumstances. Anyone who's used a very high frame rate camera knows that you often need a lot of light going into it, and 960 frames per second slow motion will need a lot of light hitting that sensor. So you need a sensor that can perform very well in low light conditions and keep the signal quiet, otherwise it's just going to look like a mess. I am going to caveat this though. We don't know specifically how this sensor works. Does it disengage its functionality at the high frame rates and maybe just use the high gain circuit only? That's to be seen. I don't know if that's even possible on a sensor because my knowledge doesn't go that far. But my caveat is that we need to see if this system does work throughout every single frame rate on the camera. There's only a few companies around that I know of that produce sensors with the dual gain output functionality on them, but it remains to be seen, and I guess we'll find out later on in the year. But for now, the Mission 1 series are the only cameras below $1,000 that I know of that have dual gain output, and I think this is pretty significant, and I thought it was worth making a video on just to let you guys know about it. So anyway, that's it for now, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, please like and subscribe if you like the video, of course, and you can support my channel further through Buy Me a Coffee. And don't forget that I also have a Substack as well, which I'm gradually building up with a wider subject matter of articles regarding video and video production and cameras. So anyway, that's it for today, and I will see you all in the next video.